Investment management has never really been a piece that I loved. I'm knowledgeable in it and I've done it for a very long time for clients, but it's not something I particularly enjoy. I'm not one of those people that are running, I'm not pulling up Y charts and trying to figure out where the market is going, and what various sectors are going to benefit over the next, several months. That's not something I particularly enjoy. And I don't necessarily believe in that philosophy as it is. I tend to lean more towards modern portfolio theory. And so it just worked out, the way I really wanted it to and the way it works for this niche.
Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSalle here, president of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. And we have a very special guest today, Mike Metzger. And it's interesting how Mike and I actually met, and Mike may remember the story better than me, but if my memory recalls appropriately, we actually connected at first on Instagram of all places, like, gosh, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years ago or something like that. And we finally had an opportunity to meet in person out in Salt Lake City at the Riskalyze conference. And it was just great to have that online connection turn into an actual real life connection where we were able to shake hands. And now, of course, we're doing the podcast. And Mike is the founder and a CFP of Lifepoint Financial Design, which is a financial planning firm focused on real estate professionals. And I'm really excited to have this conversation, not just based on the connection that I just shared, but also when I talk with advisors, real estate folks aren't necessarily, generally speaking, a desirable niche because you're constantly competing with their dollars. And a lot of them are invested in what it is they do on a daily basis. And yet Mike has gotten a lot of energy and a lot of results in working with those folks. So my hope is that today's episode will be very helpful for any advisor who has real estate professionals as clients or is looking to serve real estate professionals. So with that being said, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, David. And first of all, thank you for having me on the show. Second, it was a long roundabout way of getting to meet each other. But, I was thinking about this the other day of how this all came into play. And I think I discovered the Model FA podcast first. And then through that, learning your name, probably an Instagram connection there, sort of followed each other for years and, communicated back and forth. And then, fast forward to the Riskalyze conference in Salt Lake City and see you in person. And it's one of those weird experiences because you're just used to looking at someone on their phone and then there you were in person. But glad I got to meet you. And I'm glad now, full circle, I'm actually a part of the Model FA show.
Love it. You probably, when we met, you were like, oh, wow, you're a lot shorter than I was expecting.
No, I think I was expecting that. No,
but it's cool because not only were we connected on Instagram, but we were both very active on Instagram, not just in posting, but in, posting stories and whatnot. So it gave us an opportunity to easily interact with each other and be supportive of one another. And I think it just goes to show the power of building your brand and being active on these social platforms because you're able to find multiple connection points and multiple opportunities to interact, with folks. So if you're not spending time building a brand, I certainly would. And I believe it's episode 100 with Amy, Frank, and Alan, where we talk about their journey in building their brand. So if you haven't yet listened to that episode, definitely go back and find it. But Mike, back to you. Let's talk about your journey, right? So you're getting out of school. Did you get into the financial services industry right away? Was there kind of a step in between then and now? Help walk us through your journey post-school.
Yeah, sure. So I went to the University of Iowa and I've lived everywhere, but most of my life in the Midwest and specifically Iowa. When I left college, I was really looking for some place that's not completely freezing or gray skies, 3/4 of the year. Probably a little bit similar to Boston, but maybe even less sunshine. And so I ended up looking for jobs in Santa Barbara, California, which is just heaven on earth if you've ever been there. And I ended up just taking a job with a payroll company and specifically in their 401k department. So that sort of was my in. I worked there for a few years and then eventually started a position as, I think, an associate advisor, an advisor trainee. I can't remember what they call it, at Merrill Lynch. And I worked there for a few years made it through that program. I was the last one, a part of my training group, in still working for them at that time. As you know, they kind of churn those folks out pretty quick. Then I took a position with a large West Coast bank brokerage. I spent 5 years there. And then after 5 years, I started my own firm, Lifepoint Financial Design, and working with real estate professionals, how that all came about. Well, I mean, it was really a culmination of things. I remember at Merrill Lynch, I had a $1 million prospect and I had to bring it. I wanted to partner with who was the head of the office at the time. And I brought this person to him. $1 million prospect when you're a trainee was a pretty good deal. And so I was really excited about it, but they were considering either investing in a college rental in our town or investing those funds. And I just remember the way they talked about investing in real estate as this illiquid, terrible investment. Why would you do that? Why don't you give us your money and then pay us a commission? And that was really kind of the start of that journey. I lost that client and I was incredibly upset about it because that was a big deal for me. And then fast forward to when I worked at the bank brokerage and I started getting into more of financial planning, earning my CFP. I was running financial plans for clients. And one of the things I noticed was the folks who had rental properties actually had a more successful plan than those who had significant amounts of money in retirement accounts that they were going to be slowly draining out over the course of their retirement. And I found it really odd because a lot of the times when I was plugging in those numbers, I was not expecting the people with the rental investments, lower assets in general, as far as liquid assets, to be more successful in their financial plan than those with significant assets coming out of retirement accounts. And then so fast forward, that's why I started Lifepoint Financial Design. From the get-go, it was built to be working with real estate professionals.
What's really cool about that is you noticed let's call it mishandling of a situation. And you're like, gosh, if that's how all these conversations go with, these types of prospects, there's a void to fill to the extent where you started the firm around those people. And I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm being general in my statements, but I feel like, if someone has $1 million, the advisor in their mind, whether it's a commission or a fee, they still do the math, right? Of like, okay, well, what can I earn if I manage all of this? And then, if the prospect, wants $500,000 of that to go and get a rental property, in your mind, you're thinking, wow, well, that cuts my compensation down, in half as well. So there's this kind of dynamic where, the advisor wants to help the person, but help them in such a way that compensates them the most, whereas the realtor wants to invest in something that they know really well. And they may not know the market really well. And there's kind of this push and pull type of dynamic. So I guess, my first question is, as we unpack this niche a little bit more, how do you articulate, or before we get into that, let's actually talk about your process. So you meet with a realtor and let's say, maybe describe a particular situation with like a case study almost, and walk me through how their plan looks as it relates to money they have invested, money they have in, rentals, et cetera. Like what's sort of a typical-ish case that you work on?
Yeah, sure. I think first of all, there's a large misconception when it comes to realtors in needing or wanting to invest every bit of free cash they have into real estate investments. It's certainly something that they understand and that's what they know. But I think there's the misconception that that's where all of their money is planning to go. So the typical person who comes to me, I work with successful realtors between the ages of 30 and 45 that are more at the height of their career, right? So and it's not certainly the peak of their career, but they're moving in that direction. They're about 5-6 years into the business and they are quite successful. So that person comes to me. They typically make between $400,000 and $600,000 a year. They may have 3 to 4 rental investments. They have usually some insurance, but not enough coverage. They have a lot of different bank accounts with excess cash in it because realtors don't really have significant business costs. And so when you're looking, at what the business cost might be versus the gross income, maybe 15% of the gross income goes to business expenses. And so really there's a lot of cash to work with and they just don't know what to do with that cash. Or really the most important thing is they don't have the time because realtors work round the clock every single day, including weekends. And so that's typically what the person looks like when they come to me and when they are looking to figure out a better solution for what they're doing because they just haven't had the time to focus on it.
And how do you have the conversation around, again, this is assumptive, but I would imagine they have a lot of cash for one of two, if not both reasons. One is not having the education or the person necessary in their life to help them actually invest that cash in the market. And then also, I would imagine they're viewed as like opportunity dollars, right? Ready to be deployed when that, property comes up that they want to invest in. So how do you get them to like compartmentalize the dollars? Like, how do you have them plan for X amount in cash, X amount towards real estate, X amount towards the market? Like, how do you divvy all that stuff up?
Yeah, there's a balance. And so I certainly don't recommend that they put all of their money into rental real estate. I don't think it's a bad idea. And I don't necessarily think that someone shouldn't if that's something that they know, because really there is a decent amount of liquidity to real estate that a lot of people don't consider. But yes, there's a balance because they have three pain points, really. One is building additional wealth without the knowledge to do it, because most of these folks don't have any sort of financial background or really the financial knowledge to build wealth in a way that's going to work for them. Two is they want to reduce taxes. They have a significant amount of income and they don't really understand the financial strategies to help them in their tax planning and reducing down that overall tax bill. And the third is they just don't have time for any of the first two. So they don't really have the time that they can set aside to really learn that. So when it comes to how do we divvy out the cash, it's really helping them understand that the first and second piece, which is how do we build wealth in the most appropriate way for you? And then how do we continue to build that wealth through tax reduction strategies? And sometimes that's investing in real estate because they qualify for what's called the real estate professional status within the IRS tax code. So what that does is it takes what were passive losses in real estate, whereas previously, if you weren't a real estate professional, it can only go to offset your passive income. Well, when you're a real estate professional and you qualify for that status, then the passive losses go to offset the entire household income, including your spouse's maybe W-2 income as well.
Understood. Now, when it comes to, like, let's say a realtor comes to you, right? What I've heard from advisors is it's a lot more difficult or challenging working with them when you compare it to a W-2 style person, because a W-2 style person, generally speaking, they get the same amount of money, right? Every other week. And it's pretty easy to budget and plan. Whereas realtors, they may consistently be making good money, but it comes in like pops, right? Depending on when the property's closed. So how do you help them plan their cash flow? Because I feel like that's what hangs a lot of advisors up. And it also can hang up realtors as well, because they're like, well, I don't know when my next check is coming. Like, I can't commit to this, or I don't want to commit to this. How do you help them plan cash flow?
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest subjects that we talk about is their uneven cash flows. And they work in a commissionable industry that's totally dependent upon the housing market, interest rates, a lot of factors that they can't control. Similar to advisors with the stock market, there's a lot of factors that we can't control with the stock market too. And so I employ what's called the profit first method. Maybe some of the advisors listening to this have heard of the profit first method. It's a bookkeeping system. I do it for my own particular business. But essentially, instead of working with dollar amounts, when a commission comes in, you're working with percentages. And it's dependent upon your income levels. But you're going to set aside money into particular accounts. There's 5 different accounts, one for income, one for taxes, one for profit, one for operating expenses, and blanking on the 5th at the moment. But in general, what you're doing is you're taking that commission and you're allocating it out in percentages to these various different buckets. And so when you allocate it based on a percentage, each one of those buckets is a designated amount that they can spend. And so it can help them get through to the next commission. And it's just really getting them to buy into that system and to believe in it. And if they do, then there's always money set aside that we can either implement into various different financial strategies or, wait for whatever opportunity arises as we continue the planning process down the line.
What do you find is like a typical, obviously everyone's situation is different, but just from a general standpoint, how much of their net worth tends to be tied up in real estate versus in investable assets in the market once they go through your process? Like, what's that breakdown look like?
Yeah, they're going to have significantly more in real estate. Now, I'm not advising anybody to buy real estate in cash. We use leverage. So it's not when they have $500,000 sitting in a bank account, it's not putting $500,000 into the real estate, because you actually have a stronger ROI and cash on cash return when you use leverage. And so, out of that 500,000, maybe it's only $100,000 going towards the down payment to their next real estate property. And it could be out of state, it depends on the market. So if you go over to the Sun Belt, there's properties that are significantly less in cost as opposed to going to California, Utah, or New York. And so it doesn't take as much cash to keep their fixed income, the retirement income continuing on. And so usually when we're not talking about real estate, it's going into retirement plans, because that helps them with purpose number 2 or pain point number 2, which is to reduce taxes. And so then we're looking at the solo 401k. If somebody is very successful and has consistent income, then we could look at something like a defined benefit plan. But really, we're looking at like a solo 401k. So that does take up a good portion of the cash that they use.
Do you find that they come to you already with qualified accounts in place for retirement, or it's typically real estate, cash, and maybe dabbling with like a Betterment or Robinhood or something like that?
There's usually always a little bit of a dabbling with the Betterment, and there is always a retirement plan in place because they do get their taxes done. And if they have a decent tax accountant, the tax accountant's already talking to them about setting up a retirement plan. So those are always there. You will find additionally some other, random investments because they don't have the time to figure out the finances on their own. And so they do listen to podcasts and they do consume various different social sites. And unfortunately, they take that into account and they run with it without really doing any further research because they don't have really the time to put into the research. So they do end up with a Betterment account with crypto that has a 50% correction and all of the like.
How do you charge to work with you? Is it AUM? Is it subscription? Is it planning fee? Like, is it a combination? Insurance commissions? Like, what does your business model look like? And because what I'm trying to figure out is, have you priced yourself accordingly to where whether they invest all $1 million that they have or $500,000 that they have, how does that affect your kind of compensation and working with them? How have you structured that?
Sure. Yeah. This was a part of the beginning of the journey because obviously at a wirehouse or a bank brokerage, you are really just working on an AUM basis. They didn't, at least at the time, have the ability to charge just planning fees outside of maybe putting together an actual initial plan. And then it was capped at a certain amount. The company, the brokerage actually deemed reasonable. And so when I started my own firm, the idea was I was going to be moving over to a subscription basis. And that's how my firm exists today. So the only way to really work with realtors and give completely unbiased and objective advice where you're not discounting real estate, because real estate is a very successful tool in building up a good retirement as well as equity in general. And so on a subscription basis, regardless of what I'm managing, they're paying me a monthly fee for ongoing financial planning throughout the year. On top of that, I do have a separate component that I don't require investments under management, but if they would like me to manage their assets because they don't really have an understanding of how to do that, then I can also do that for a separate AUM fee.
Okay, cool. So you're truly able to, through the subscription model, obviously you care, but for sakes of this conversation, you don't care what they or how they end up divvying up their money as long as it's somewhat in relation to the plan that was put in place that ultimately is aligned with the goals that they shared with you. And if that means 75% of their net worth is in real estate or 25% of their net worth is in real estate, you're comped the same anyways. And then it seems like you've positioned it to where if they do want you to manage the assets, that's more of icing on the cake for you, but you're planning around the subscription itself and the AUM is just a bonus, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Investment management has never really been a piece that I loved. I'm knowledgeable in it and I've done it for a very long time for clients, but it's not something I particularly enjoy. I'm not one of those people that are running, I'm not pulling up Y charts and trying to figure out where the market is going, and what various sectors are going to benefit over the next, several months. That's not something I particularly enjoy. And I don't necessarily believe in that philosophy as it is. I tend to lean more towards modern portfolio theory. And so it just worked out, the way I really wanted it to and the way it works for this niche.
Cool. Now, regardless of who you're serving, what I've heard from folks that are considering the subscription fee or that even are doing the subscription fee, there's a challenge that they experience in that, hey, a lot of the heavy lifting is done in the first quarter or two of working together. And then to a certain degree, it's sort of on autopilot moving forward. So as an example, maybe you meet 3, 4, 5 times over the first, 3, 4, 5 months, right? And then, they're paying that monthly fee, and then you don't meet as frequently, but they're still getting charged the monthly fee. What are you doing to continue to add value after the heavy lifting has been done to justify to the client that monthly fee that they're still paying, even if they're like not meeting with you in that particular month? Like, what does your ongoing service model look like to where you don't have people, churning out of the business being like, well, I already got everything I needed, so, I'm good now. How does that work?
I think this poses a challenge really to all financial planners. This is something that is constantly being adjusted within my firm. I'm always trying to add more value in that process. As it looks right now, there's 3 meetings a year, very strategic meetings that have specific planning objectives in each one of those meetings. So I call it the winter meeting, the summer meeting, and the fall meeting. The winter meeting is going to be a little bit more tax planning heavy. The summer meeting is really a little bit more real estate focused. And so analyzing their real estate, looking to see if there's opportunities to add more value to that real estate, running the numbers for them, looking at homeowners insurance policies, helping review the entity structure of the real estate properties, making sure they're deeded correctly, making sure the LLCs are set up properly. And then the fall meeting is a little bit more, again, tax planning heavy. It's also open enrollment season. So for a lot of those real estate agents that have W-2 spouses, that we're looking at their employer benefits and making sure that it coordinates with what the real estate agent is doing with their entrepreneurship and self-employment. And then ongoing, there's monthly deliverables. So there's automated emails that go out with specific financial planning topics that are relevant to those months. And then they also have access to me. So if they have any questions that come up during the year, they know that they can feel free to email me or call me. But of course, always looking to add more value as our industry and entrepreneurship changes. And so it's often a work in progress with the client service model.
And I would imagine that realtors, service-based professionals, advisor, service-based professionals, when you peel back the various layers of the onion, at the core, there's a sales component, right, in both professions. So I would imagine that, I'm just trying to picture if I was working with realtors who are probably also, type A salespeople, like I am, it must be an enjoyable niche to work with, where you're able to actually like relate to folks and be casually professional, if that makes sense, and be wired in a similar way. I'm sure you're able to connect with them too on like, personal development books or podcasts, and you can share that back and forth. Like, what's that like? Because when we help folks with identifying a niche, we want to we encourage them to look at 2 main pieces, which is passion. Are you passionate about serving these people? Do they give you energy? And are they profitable? Right. So you may be passionate about helping elementary school teachers, but it's not going to be as profitable as, being passionate about real estate folks or private equity folks or business owners, et cetera. And if I were to guess, it's probably a lot of fun working with these people.
Yeah, it is. It is. Previously at Merrill Lynch and the bank brokerage that I was at, you're working with a lot of retirees. And I think there's a little bit of this standard that you show up in your suit. It's a very organized meeting. You have this agenda that you're running through. You're showing them the 80-page financial plan. With realtors, it is much more casual. It's also a topic that I love talking about. So my wife is a realtor. That's something that also led me into this direction. And then I own real estate investments myself, and I am a believer in real estate as a wealth builder. And so it's fun, and it is more casual because they're casual by industry. Of course, in the onboarding process or in the introductory process, when you're really trying to figure out if it's someone you want to work with, you're really going to weed out the folks that don't really fit with your personality type. So naturally, those people kind of fall out of my business. But then the people that remain, I enjoy talking to them and I enjoy our time together. It doesn't feel as formal and it doesn't feel as strict in the process.
So the two things that you shared in your story that I want to highlight is your wife is a realtor. So you're exposed to that secondhand, but basically firsthand, right? You guys are with each other all the time. And having an investment property or two or three, whatever you have currently, I would imagine that gives you some credibility in their eyes. Do you share that early on when you begin conversations with them?
I do. Yeah. It's not really a focal point, but it is something that I start the process off with. And I think that definitely brings down the edge that they may have walked into the meeting with, because they've met with other financial planners or they've heard from other financial advisors or maybe stories from their realtor friends. And they've heard about, financial advisors really just trying to get as much money from them, as much cash as they have, or other investments that they may have, and say, I need to manage that all. And here's the fee for that. And that's just typically the way our industry has been. And a lot of them have a bit of a bad taste in their mouth from our industry for that reason. And so I do mention that up front, that I'm a believer in real estate. My wife is a realtor. I do own real estate investments. I think it's a very valuable asset class. And that does tend to calm them down. And then it brings the experience a little bit more casual and a little bit more fun and free flowing from there.
And I imagine too that the pricing model really resonates because they're able to see that it doesn't matter, how much you're managing, if it's all or some or none of it, you're getting paid regardless. So they probably actually believe that you're giving unbiased advice because you have that pricing model. Have you gotten feedback like that? Or what's their feedback when perhaps previously they were exposed to the exclusive sort of AUM model and maybe they haven't come across this pricing model? Like, what's their reaction to that?
Yeah, they're really pleasantly surprised when they hear it's a subscription based. I do say I'm agnostic to whether or not I manage their money. And I think that also takes the edge off of them as well. It's something that they've been looking for that they didn't necessarily realize existed out there, because I think, again, their only exposure is people in suits telling them, this is what I'm going to do with your money. Here's what we're investing in. And to them, that's just not going to resonate whatsoever. I think they are looking for someone that is agnostic to investing their money and really does believe in what they believe in, which is real estate being a good asset class, and also helping them with the financial planning strategies that help them reduce taxes. Because again, that's something that's a big sore point for them. They've been looking for that help, and their tax accountants typically aren't giving it to them. And that's where they're happy that that is also included as a part of the subscription basis.
It's cool. I feel like what you've done a good job at, from what I've been able to gather throughout the conversation so far, is you're kind of meeting them where they're at. I mean, you built your business, if I understood you correctly, for this niche. So from the beginning, when you started the company, it was built for them. So it's cool to see how you've addressed things like their inconsistent or lumpy cash flow, the conflicting demands on their dollars and where that goes. You've priced yourself accordingly. You've built out the service model. With other, sales oriented folks, you have plenty of opportunity to connect with them in between the meetings, sharing resources, ideas, business strategies, things along those lines. I would imagine that the majority of the folks that you work with, because it is a sales type of role as a realtor, that they're active on social media. So now you're active on social media. So you're probably interacting with them all the time, whether it's replying to, a story post or something like that. And I feel like from this conversation, you've done a good job building the service model to add value, but also picking a group of people that is active on social to where you can interact a bunch in between, and it just further strengthens, the relationship, and it doesn't require a lot of work. So it's been really cool to hear that.
Yeah. And I think I'll just reiterate that point. I think a lot of realtors and real estate agents, especially between 30 and 45, which is my niche, I think they want to see the real you. They don't want to see that suit. They want to know that you are a genuine person, someone that they can connect with on their level. and they live and breathe on Instagram and Facebook. And so I've just happened to choose Instagram as my one focus really for marketing efforts. And that's showcasing not only the niche and specialized knowledge that I have that they're not hearing in other places, but also then sharing a little bit more about my personal life and then connecting with them because they are very social people. And so clients and not clients, it's funny, I have what I would consider very good relationships with real estate agents across the country that I've never actually met in person. And also having clients that I've met through Instagram that I've never actually met in person. And so it's very interesting, but it can be very authentic if you actually put that out there and want it to be. So they do feel like they know exactly who I am. They know my wife. They've seen my kid. They know my story. They know what I'm into as far as personal activities. And then on top of that, get to see how I actually work with real estate agent clients.
And they, just like they would imagine that people try and look them up beforehand, they look you up, they go through, your Instagram, see your posts, get a sense of what, life looks like and what you're talking about. They probably come to that meeting with their guard way more down than if they weren't exposed to you, in advance. So, and if anything, it solidifies as they think about themselves in the consumer seat and how they feel going into that meeting and the level of trust that they may already have with you. It probably reiterates the importance of what they're doing on social media as well, with the folks that they're serving. I just feel like it's a cool niche that's so similar to what we do in terms of their daily activities and, the way that they're trying to help people and build business, that there's just so many different connection points to where you can be the go-to guy, for these folks for content and personal development and financial planning. And, who knows, maybe they come across a deal where they're like, hey, Mike, you may be interested in this, and you can actually do business together in the other direction. You've decided to serve a niche that I don't want to say is easy to serve, but there's so many different ways that you can connect with them that it makes it easier to build and solidify the relationship, which is really cool. Because like if you're working with a retiree or an executive, it's like there's only so much you guys are going to, talk about. But when you have someone who's running in a parallel lane to you, there's a lot of stuff that you guys can connect on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's validation to them too, because they're also living on Instagram to try and attract the people that they want to attract as well, as far as home buyers or home sellers. And so it's just a natural connection through the same efforts. We're both trying to do the exact same thing. And so there is parallel similarities. I am interested in some of the real estate investments that they might be posting on Instagram, and vice versa. They might be interested in some financial strategy that I talked about as well. I think for advisors that have considered getting on social media and actually trying to interact with people, a lot of advisors, including myself, when I first started down this route, put a little too much thought into it. I think we always try and have a growth mentality. And so we look at it as, well, how am I going to attract the most amount of followers? What do I have to do? Hire a production team or a content team? And really, people just want to see the real you. They just want to hear that you have the knowledge that they're looking for and that you're a real person and can connect with them. So it's really not about the amount of followers that you have, or even necessarily the production of the content that you put out there. I think, David, you and I have talked about my stuff isn't fantastic, but it's enough and it gets the point across. People see what I'm talking about, and it isn't something that they've heard because this is what I do on a daily basis. And then when they do come into meetings, as you were explaining a bit earlier, is they typically do, when we first have the introductory meeting, if they reach out to me and they might want to possibly be a client, we have this introduction call. The first thing they say is, how was that race you just did? Or weren't you just in Costa Rica? And, it already starts it off very warm and personal before we even get into any of the logistics on the business.
Yeah, it's a great dynamic to have. And to your point about social, it's a lot of times people compare their chapter 1 to someone else's chapter, 20. And it's like, go back and look at their chapter 1 and, it didn't look like it did now. So just, get started, do something, and you can refine it, over time if you would like. But this has been great, man. I do want to pivot. So if this is your first time listening to an episode, for everyone who's listening today, one of the ways that we end the show is to figure out a book that's had an impact on our guests. And it's our way of kind of distilling a reading list for everyone that's listening. So Mike, you had chose the book, The Happiness Equation. And I feel like I remember reading it, but been struggling in thinking about what it actually was. So help me understand the impact that it's had on you. Why'd you choose that book?
Yeah, it was hard to choose a book because I am an avid reader and there's so many great books. And I think books come to you at specific moments when you need them, right? And that's when books stick out to you, is because you needed it at that moment. The Happiness Equation was a really good book for me that was pivotal in helping me transition to owning my own firm, making the jump and the leap into the unknown of transitioning firms. And a lot of it revolves around, similar to the 4-hour work week, in the sense of, what is this all for? What are you doing this for? And the Happiness Equation really talks about separating what's the most meaningful and what's not. And so it relates to work, right? The below the line tasks that you want to delegate out to other people, and the energy giving tasks that you love to do and that have the most impact, focus on doing those. And so it really just separates those out and puts it in context of why we're doing this. And I think just like realtors that we preach to our clients or retirees or whoever it is that we're working with, the same applies for us. And sometimes we're the shoe cobbler with no shoes, right? And we're not focusing on why we're building this business. And in there, they tell a story. And you can find the story, I think, in a bunch of different places, but it's called The Mexican Fisherman. And basically, it's a Harvard grad goes down to Mexico and he takes a fishing trip. And the fisherman comes back and he says, this is fantastic. You should really showcase this to everyone, and you can make so much more money, and he explains this process of how to do it. And it was a 20-year process to basically live the life he was already living. And so I think the book helps you break down. Sometimes we don't have to make it so complicated. Let's just focus on what we enjoy and what this is all for. And I think the rest will fall into place.
Yeah, we have this exercise that we bring clients through. And actually, if anyone wants a copy of the worksheet, just email me at david@modelfa.com. And in the subject line, just type in energy audit. But we have this energy audit that kind of walks people through an exercise similar to what you mentioned, where there's 4 quadrants. Top left is things that you love to do and you're great at. The top right is things that you like to do and you're good at. Bottom left are things that you don't like, but you're still good at. And then finally, the bottom right quadrant, things that you don't like and you're bad at. And filling out kind of your day-to-day activities and things that you're into and putting them in the quadrants, and then doing your best to spend as much time in the top 2 quadrants as possible, and either compartmentalize the bottom 2 quadrants to where you're doing those in a limited way, or you're delegating, automating, or deleting them completely. So I feel like that's similar-ish to what you were just alluding to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, cool, man. It's been good to get to know each other on Instagram, as well as meet in person and being able to do this podcast now. So I appreciate your time. If I'm listening and I want to check out, like, hey, what does Mike's brand look like? Where do they find you?
Yeah, sure. My website is lifepointfd.com, is in Lifepoint Financial Design. You can find me on Instagram. It's just michael.b.metzger. I am on all the other socials, but I'm really not active on there. So really, Instagram is the route to find me.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you joining. I appreciate everyone here listening today, and we'll chat soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, David. Thank you for having me on the show.
Of course. Take care.